On this poignant Veterans Day morning, as the sun cast long shadows over the Arizona desert, an elderly man named Arthur Shaw, with a gait measured by the wisdom of years, approached Fort Walker, an Army base wrapped in solemn silence. Shaw, at around 80 years old, carried himself with the dignity of someone who knew that haste seldom sweetened outcomes. His slender figure was cloaked in clothing as modest as it was meticulously cared for: khaki trousers, a simple blue shirt, and a jacket worn thin by the passage of time. Despite the decades, he stood with the poise of a soldier, a testament to his military past. The annual memorial service was underway at Fort Walker, an event Shaw had never before graced with his presence, though he lived a mere 30 miles away for the last 4 decades. In his hand, he held 2 relics of his past: a military ID card, its edges softened like the pages of a cherished book, and an envelope sealed with the authority of government tape. His face, a map of time, showed no trace of emotion as he neared the base's entrance. "Good morning," Shaw greeted the guard, his voice a quiet melody of respect. "I'd like to visit the memorial site within the base." Lieutenant Miller, young and perhaps a touch jaded by his routine duties, reached for the ID card. His eyes widened at its antiquity. "Sir, this expired in 1994, he noted, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth as he displayed the card. "You can't seriously believe this is still valid?" Shaw's response was silence, his expression one of patient endurance, a weariness that seemed to seep from his very bones. Here was a man not just old in years, but in the depth of experiences that had shaped him, standing before a young officer who perhaps could not yet fathom the weight of time. Sergeant Lopez, a towering figure with a linebacker's build, and a voice that boomed like thunder across the checkpoint, approached. "People think they can waltz in here with ancient IDs or counterfeit military credentials," he exclaimed, his words echoing through the crisp air. Shaw, standing there in quiet dignity, extended his hand to receive his identification from Miller, who could barely contain his chuckles. "If you're aiming to step foot onto a military base, you better come armed with valid identification." Miller's voice dripped with condescension, his smirk broadening as he watched Shaw. "You need to be a soldier in the flesh, not just a relic with an outdated card." A small throng of guards and personnel had gathered, drawn by the spectacle of Lopez's commanding voice. Amusement painted the faces of many, while a few shifted uncomfortably, yet none dared to step in. Shaw simply nodded, his movements deliberate as he pocketed his ID in the envelope, turning away without a word of protest or explanation. He walked back towards the public parking area, his steps measured, his silence speaking volumes of his acceptance of their verdict. From the guard booth, young Private Rick Hernandez observed the entire interaction. Unlike his colleagues, he didn't find humor in the situation. There was something about the old man's calm, dignified retreat that seemed out of the ordinary. Most would argue, show frustration, or plead their case, but Shaw had merely accepted the dismissal with a poise that felt anachronistic. Rick, only 6 months into his logistics role after basic training, had been raised on tales of the old guard, those quiet professionals who served in the shadows of the Cold War in Vietnam. Shaw's bearing echoed those stories, stirring a curiosity within him. As the guards dispersed to their posts, Rick retreated to the back room, pulling out his phone. His uncle, stationed in personnel records at the Pentagon, might know something about this enigmatic figure. As Rick hung up the call, his eyes lingered on Uncle Jim's retreating figure through the window. The elderly man, now a silhouette against the morning light, had paused by a bench just outside the gate. He wasn't leaving, merely sitting with a quiet patience, as if expecting something or someone. "When everyone turns their back, only conscience remains," Rick whispered to himself, the echo of his father's words resonating deeply. The news of the peculiar encounter at the gate spread like wildfire among the morning shift. Helen Martinez, a familiar face in the base cafeteria for over 3 decades, caught snippets of laughter from the guards as they reached for their morning coffee. Her interest piqued. She leaned in, wiping her hands on her apron. "What did this man look like?" she inquired, her voice laced with curiosity. "Skinny old guy, maybe 80, with an incredibly straight posture," one of the guards replied, chuckling. "Had an ID from '94. Can you believe that?" Helen's face softened, a spark of recognition in her eyes. Was he wearing a brown jacket? Quiet, didn't argue? Yeah, that's him. You know this guy? Helen nodded slowly, her mind drifting back. I've seen him before, just once. Back in '89, there was a fire at the weapons depot. 3 men were trapped inside. That man, she pointed towards the bench, walked straight into the inferno and pulled them out, one by one. I never knew his name, but I never forgot his face. The guard's skepticism was palpable, his eyebrows knitting together in disbelief. Really? That old man? Yes, Helen affirmed, her voice steady yet filled with a quiet awe. He was a hero that day. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them, leaving a poignant echo of the past and the present. The whispers of Helen's tale painted an image so vivid, so poignant, that it was hard not to feel the sting of injustice. Heroes don't get turned away at gates, she had said with a shrug, her voice a mix of resignation and defiance. But that's what happened to Arthur Shaw. Ask Colonel Reynolds if you doubt me. He was there when they pulled him out. The story spread like wildfire across the base, igniting curiosity and disbelief. A young communications officer, catching wind of Helen's words, snapped a blurry photo of Shaw, sitting forlornly on a bench outside the gate. With a tap on his device, the image was shared on the internal messaging system, captioned with a plea, "Anyone know this veteran turned away at the gate? Helen says he saved lives in the '89 depot fire." The responses were immediate, a flood of digital whispers. That looks like the guy in the old photo in Colonel Reynolds' office. My dad served in the '70s, says that could be Arthur Shaw, but thought he was long gone. Wasn't there an Arthur Shaw who received a classified commendation during Vietnam? Meanwhile, Rick Hernandez's heart pounded with each tick of the clock, his eyes fixed on the staff phone. Barely 20 minutes after his urgent call to the Pentagon, the phone shattered the silence with a sharp ring. Rick snatched it up on the first chime. "Private Hernandez, this is Colonel Wexler from the Pentagon. I need to speak with the commanding officer of your security checkpoint immediately. Put me on speaker." Rick's pulse quickened as he beckoned Lieutenant Miller over. "Sir, call from the Pentagon. They're asking for you." Miller, adjusting his uniform with a look of bewilderment, took the receiver. "This is Lieutenant Miller. Lieutenant, this is Colonel James Wexler, Special Operations Historical Division. Put this call on speaker immediately." As Miller complied, a palpable tension filled the small security office, the air heavy with anticipation. Colonel Wexler's voice, authoritative and clear, cut through the silence like a knife. "The man you just turned away at your gate is retired Colonel Arthur E. Shaw, former commander of Special Forces Bravo Team from 1971 to 1979. His security clearance remains active despite his..." In the hushed tension of the room, Sergeant Lopez, who had been nonchalantly leaning against the wall, snapped to attention. Lieutenant Miller's face went ashen, his voice trembling as he stammered, "Sir, we didn't know." But before he could finish, Wexler interjected, his voice firm and clear. "Colonel Shaw is here for the annual memorial service, which he has every right to attend." A wave of realization swept over the room. Colonel Shaw, the man who had commanded the most successful extraction unit in Vietnam, the very hero who led the storied Cambodia prisoner rescue mission in 1975. A mission so shrouded in mystery and valor, where a small, intrepid team had miraculously liberated 28 American POWs from deep within enemy lines, unscathed. Wexler, with a knowing glance, continued, "A vehicle is already on its way to your location. I suggest you extend every courtesy to Colonel Shaw until it arrives." As if summoned by his words, a sleek black military SUV rolled up to the gate. Out stepped 3 senior officers, their movements brisk, their purpose clear. Leading them was Colonel Harris, a full bird colonel, his chest adorned with rows of combat ribbons, a testament to his storied career. "Where is Arthur Shaw?" Colonel Harris demanded, his gaze piercing through the quietude. Miller, still reeling from the shock, simply pointed to the bench outside. With a sharp nod, Harris strode towards Shaw, the other officers trailing behind him. Rick, from his vantage point by the window, watched the scene unfold. Harris approached Shaw, offering a crisp salute. Shaw, with a deliberate slowness, returned the gesture. Words were exchanged, hands clasped in a firm handshake, and Shaw, retrieving an envelope from his pocket, handed it over to Harris. 15 minutes passed, a mere blink in the unfolding drama. Shaw, now flanked by the officers, returned to the gate. This time, Lieutenant Miller and Sergeant Lopez stood at rigid attention, their earlier casual demeanor replaced by military discipline. "These gentlemen will be entering the base under my authorization," Colonel Harris declared, his voice leaving no room for dissent as they proceeded through the gate. The air was thick with respect, anticipation, and the unspoken weight of history. Colonel Harris halted abruptly, his gaze shifting to the security team. His voice carried the weight of revelation. "The ID card you so flippantly dismissed, the one you thought was a mere relic, contains an embedded transmitter. Colonel Shaw activates it precisely once a year on Veterans Day to signal he's still among us. We monitor for that signal, specifically." Miller swallowed hard, the gravity of his oversight settling in. "Sir, I had no idea," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "No, you didn't," Harris agreed, his tone icy with the sting of truth. "You saw an old man with an expired ID and made your judgments. That man commanded operations you'll never have clearance to read about. He saved more American lives than everyone at this checkpoint combined." As the group moved beyond earshot, Rick turned to Miller, his face etched with concern. "Sir, what just happened?" Miller ran a hand over his face, the realization heavy upon him. "We just insulted a living legend. That's what happened." Lopez shook his head in disbelief, his voice tinged with awe. "Cambodia rescue mission? That's like finding out you yelled at Rambo." Later that morning, Rick's uncle called, his voice tight with concern. "Do you have any idea who that was? Arthur Shaw isn't just some retired colonel. After Vietnam, he ran the most classified extraction unit in military history. His operations are still redacted in official records. Why would someone like that simply accept being turned away?" Rick's question hung in the air. His uncle's response came after a long pause. "Men like Shaw, they don't need to prove themselves to anyone. They know who they are. That's what made them so effective, the absolute absence of ego. The mission was everything." As the day unfolded, whispers and stories filtered through unofficial channels. Shaw had lived quietly in a small Arizona town since his retirement, shunning the limelight, refusing interviews, and declining invitations to military functions. Today was the first time in decades he had attempted to visit a military installation. The envelope he had brought contained personal letters, a silent testament to his enduring legacy. Today, after 4 decades of silent remembrance, Colonel Arthur Shaw finally stood at the gate of Fort Walker, a figure of unwavering dignity. His heart, once heavy with unspoken words, now swelled with the anticipation of an overdue reunion. For 40 years, he had penned letters to the families of those brave souls lost under his command. Letters of solace, letters of sorrow, letters that whispered of valor and sacrifice. These missives, heartfelt yet undelivered, were his silent tribute to those whose names graced the solemn memorial within the base. Until this day, he had never found the courage to deliver them in person. "Do you feel the weight of this moment as I do?" one might wonder, as the impact of this long-awaited encounter surely stirs the soul. By noon, Fort Walker transformed from a place of routine to a hive of fervent activity. The base commander, with a voice of urgent command, had declared an emergency protocol: prepare an honor reception for Colonel Arthur Shaw. The news ignited like wildfire through the ranks. Soldiers, momentarily distracted from their daily drills, hurried to assemble along the main thoroughfare. An honor guard was hastily assembled, their dress uniforms a sharp contrast to the usual camouflage. The memorial site, Shaw's ultimate destination, was readied with meticulous care for a visitor of unparalleled distinction. Lieutenant Miller, still reeling from the morning's revelations, stood at his post, his gaze fixed on the returning procession. Colonel Shaw, in his unassuming civilian attire, had respectfully declined the formal military dress offered to him. Yet in his simple clothes, he exuded a presence that demanded reverence. As he neared the gate once more, a scene of profound respect unfolded. Every soldier present, as if moved by a single spirit, snapped to attention, their salutes a testament to the man who had once led them, or others like them, into the fray. Shaw, with the grace of a man who had lived through countless such moments, returned the salute with practiced ease, his weathered hand moving with the certainty of muscle memory. The base's communication channels buzzed with directives. Urgent. All personnel be advised. Colonel Arthur E. Shaw, retired, is on base for memorial visit. Full honors protocol in effect. Alert the Pentagon. Incident involves decorated Special Forces commander. Show appropriate respect. Reminder, media blackout in effect regarding Colonel Shaw's presence. Across veteran forums linked to Fort Walker, messages surged like waves, each one echoing the disbelief and reverence. Shaw is alive. The Arthur Shaw. I once thought he was gone, lost to the annals of time. My father, who served under him in '73, always spoke of Colonel Arthur Shaw with a reverence that was almost palpable. He was the finest officer I ever knew, he'd say, his voice thick with admiration. This was the man who made it his creed to leave no one behind, ever. The base's digital bulletin board, a virtual tapestry of history, overflowed with first-hand accounts from grizzled veterans who had been under Shaw's command. One tale recounted, I was a radio operator in Vietnam when Shaw led an extraction. We were pinned down for 72 hours. He never slept, never uttered a word of complaint, just kept us alive until extraction was possible. Another shared, Shaw refused a Silver Star in '76, claiming the mission itself was the only reward he needed. Oh, the stories painted a portrait of a man who lived the warrior ethos like no other. Lieutenant Miller, after being relieved from his post by another officer, sought out this legend. There he found Colonel Shaw, standing silently before the memorial wall, his gaze fixed on a section dedicated to Southeast Asia operations. Miller approached with the hesitancy of a man carrying the weight of his errors, his steps heavy with shame. Colonel Shaw, sir, Miller began, his voice a mere whisper, I want to apologize for my behavior this morning. I was disrespectful and judgmental. Shaw turned slowly, his expression unreadable, his gaze piercing through the young officer. After what seemed an eternity, he spoke, his voice calm, yet carrying the weight of years of experience. You were doing your job, Lieutenant. No, sir, Miller countered, his voice steadier now. I was following procedure, but I wasn't doing my job. My duty is to protect this base and show respect to those who've served. I failed at that. Shaw considered this, his eyes softening. The fault isn't yours, Lieutenant. It's in how you were trained to see people. Miller, confused yet intrigued, listened as Shaw continued. In my day, we were taught to evaluate the man, not just his credentials. That's been lost somewhere along the way. This simple observation struck Miller with the force of a physical blow. How had he become so ensnared in rules and protocols that he overlooked the essence of those he was meant to serve? By early afternoon, the base commander had arranged an impromptu gathering in the main auditorium. The seats were filled with over 200 personnel, predominantly young recruits, many of whom had never heard of Arthur Shaw until today. Along the walls, senior officers stood, their faces a mix of curiosity and respect. The base commander, a 2-star general, had specifically flown in upon hearing that Shaw was on base. He approached the podium with a sense of urgency. Today, we are graced with an unexpected honor, he announced, his voice resonating through the auditorium. With us is Colonel Arthur Shaw, dead, whose service record remains shrouded in secrecy even to this day. Colonel Shaw has graciously agreed to impart some wisdom to our newest service members. A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd as Shaw, his presence commanding despite his age, made his way to the stage. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his tall frame still imposing. Upon reaching the podium, he paused, surveying the room with a silent, reflective gaze. I didn't come here for recognition, he began, his voice soft yet penetrating the silence with ease. I came to pay respects to those who didn't make it back home, whose names are etched on that wall outside. His eyes swept over the sea of young faces, each one absorbing his words with rapt attention. You've asked me to speak to these recruits. Here's what I'll say. Honor isn't found in the uniform you wear, the rank you hold, or the ID card in your pocket. Honor is how you carry yourself when no one is watching. It's the commitments you honor when they're hardest to keep. The auditorium was engulfed in a profound silence as Shaw's words sank in. I've never spoken publicly about my service, not because it was classified, but because the work itself was what mattered, not the individual performing it. The men I served with understood that we didn't need public recognition. We had each other's respect, and that was more than enough. His gaze eventually settled on Lieutenant Miller at the back, his eyes conveying a depth of experience and emotion that only a lifetime of service could impart. In the crowd, as Colonel Shaw moved through the sea of officers and enlisted personnel eager to grasp his hand, a sergeant stepped forward, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Sir," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "my father was at Cam Ranh Bay in '72. He always spoke of a Colonel Shaw who orchestrated the extraction that saved his unit. Was that you?" Shaw paused, studying the sergeant's face intently. "What was your father's name, son?" he asked gently. "Carlos Lopez, sir, 5th Infantry," came the reply. Shaw's nod was slow, reflective. "I remember the operation. Your father was brave. He helped carry 2 wounded men to the extraction point." Lopez's eyes widened in shock and pride. "He never told me that part." "The brave ones rarely talk about it," Shaw responded, his voice filled with a quiet respect. As the day unfolded, an unexpected gesture took root. Lieutenant Miller, after conferring with his superiors, commissioned a small bronze plaque. By late afternoon, this plaque would grace the checkpoint where Shaw had been turned away earlier that morning. It would bear the inscription, "Shaw Gate, in honor of quiet valor." As Shaw prepared to depart, a senior intelligence officer, who had just flown in from Washington, approached him. "Colonel," he said in a hushed tone, "there's something you should know. Those letters you've been writing all these years to the families, they've been delivered. All of them." Shaw's expression was one of genuine astonishment. "How? I never sent them." "No, but you wrote the names and addresses on the envelopes. After you were identified in our monitoring system each year," the officer explained, his voice tinged with admiration, "we made sure they reached their destination." Imagine, dear reader, the profound impact of those letters. Each one a testament to a life, a memory, a sacrifice. What must it have been like for those families to receive such unexpected, heartfelt messages from a man they never knew, yet who knew their loved ones so well? As the sun began to cast long shadows over Fort Walker, Shaw stood still, his form a solitary figure against the backdrop of the memorial wall. His fingers delicately traced the names etched in stone, each one a poignant reminder of those he couldn't save. His heart, heavy with the weight of years, absorbed the staggering revelation. His annual letters, penned in the quiet solitude of remembrance, had not merely been private acts of penance. They had reached their destinations, touching the lives of those he thought he had failed. The Sullivan family in Oregon, the Williamses in Georgia, every year they had received his words. Some had cherished each letter, holding on to them as if they were lifelines to their lost loved ones. Shaw, visibly moved by this unexpected connection, turned to the officer beside him, who confirmed with a nod, "All of them, sir. Every single one." In the fading light, a small cadre of officers stood at a respectful distance, their eyes fixed on the living legend as he paid his respects. As Shaw turned to leave, his voice was soft but clear, his words destined to echo through time. "I came only to visit those I couldn't save." That evening, as Shaw was escorted off the base with full honors, Lieutenant Miller stood at attention by the gate, his salute crisp, a gesture of respect that transcended the morning's misunderstanding. Shaw, meeting Miller's gaze, returned the salute with a dignified precision. In that silent exchange, there was an understanding, a recognition that honor, once earned, remains undiminished by the passage of time or the trials of circumstance. When was the moment in your life when justice, though delayed, arrived with a sweetness that lingered? In the quiet months that followed, Arthur Shaw returned to his simple existence in a small Arizona town where he had lived in anonymity for decades. He turned down interview requests, and with a gentle refusal, he declined the numerous honors military organizations wished to bestow upon him. Yet this tale soon took on a vibrant life of its own. The incident, known within military circles as the Pentagon Call, morphed into a poignant lesson in leadership, showcased at officer training schools nationwide. At Shaw's behest, his name remained unmentioned, yet the essence of his story was laid bare as a study in the stark contrast between mere protocol adherence and the embodiment of true leadership. True to his commitment, Lieutenant Miller saw to it that a bronze plaque graced the checkpoint, its inscription echoing Shaw's poignant request, "Honor endures long after credentials expire." Shaw's expired military ID, the very card that had sparked such disdain and then such reverence, found a home in a modest display case at Fort Walker's historical collection. Adjacent to it, a placard narrated the tale of this seemingly insignificant piece of plastic, once belonging to a profoundly decorated commander in the annals of modern military history. The display refrained from detailing Shaw's missions out of respect for both classified information and his own wishes, concluding instead with a stirring line, "An expired ID, but honor that never will." Come the next Veterans Day, a black SUV once more rolled up to Shaw's unassuming abode. This time, however, his presence was anticipated, marking the beginning of a tradition that would persist for the rest of his life, a silent nod to his unending bond with the military family he had so loyally served. Rick Hernandez, the young private whose call had ignited the day's events, found himself unexpectedly transferred to officer candidate school, buoyed by a personal recommendation from a Pentagon colonel. At his graduation, Hernandez shared the lesson that had reshaped his view on military service. Never judge a warrior by the date on a plastic card. Judge them by the honor in their actions. When asked years later about that unforgettable Veterans Day by then Captain Miller, with a voice thick with emotion, reflected, "What does it mean to truly honor those who serve? It's not in the pomp and circumstance, but in the quiet, enduring respect for their sacrifice." In moments of introspection, Miller would ponder aloud, "Some badges need not be pinned to a uniform. They are etched in the very essence of blood and bravery." With wisdom that only experience could impart, he would impart to the young officers under his command, "Beware, for the person you might dismiss could be the very soul who shielded you from horrors you've never known." Colonel Arthur Shaw, ever the stalwart guardian of honor, continued his tradition of annual letters, each one a beacon of integrity. In his last discovered on his desk upon his passing at the tender age of 89, he penned, "Honor does not dim. It only requires a single soul to keep its flame alive. Justice, though it may tarry, is never truly gone. Stand firm in righteousness, even when the world turns its back." His words, a testament to a life lived with unwavering principle, resonate with us all. Have you ever held your ground when all seemed lost? Share your story now. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories, where we believe that truth and justice will always find their way. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that doing the right thing is worth every ounce of effort. This ID expired in 1994, the officer chuckled, lifting the frayed military card. The old man, silent, stood with a dignity that spoke volumes. "If you wish to enter the base, you must be a real soldier," the young lieutenant jested. But mere minutes later, the phone rang, and the voice on the line uttered but one sentence. "We're talking about the former commander of Special Forces Bravo Team." Who indeed were they speaking to? Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us on this journey through the annals of courage and conviction. Your support fuels our mission to share stories that inspire and uplift. Please leave a comment with your thoughts. Like this video to spread the light, share it to touch more lives, and consider subscribing to our channel for more tales of heroism and honor. Together, let us remember and honor those who stood for what is right in the face of all adversity.